It is now it is now 9 o'clock, so I'm gonna go ahead and get us started. So those of you who have not met me before, my name is Dominisha Newton, and I'm the Senior Student Advisor at the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis. And I've been with the organization since 2019. And this morning, our FAFSA Friday session will be a walk through the updated FAFSA application. So what our goal is for today is to strengthen our understanding of what students and families are going to experience with the updated FAFSA application, and also dive a little more into the potential challenges or barriers that students might encounter when they're filling out the FAFSA with these changes. Those of you that have come to our FAFSA Fridays in the past, I want to point out that this session might be a bit longer than our previous FAFSA Fridays because we will be going through essentially every slide that is on the FAFSA application. And so if you do have to head out early, I want you all to know that this will be recorded. And so it'll be available next week for those that may have to head out early, and which is understandable. I also want to note that there's a lot of key terms with the FAFSA. Obviously, I'll be using those new terms. And if anyone needs a refresher on those, we touched on those in our previous FAFSA Fridays. And Teresa's going to throw in a link to those in the chat for everybody, just in case you need them. All right. So we have all probably heard by now that the new FAFSA application is going to open up by December 31st. You all can probably imagine that this will delay the financial aid process for students. And then there also may be delays on when college financial aid offices are going to receive students' data from the FAFSA application. So this means that for our students, especially in Missouri, they'll have minimal time to complete their FAFSA application from the time that it opens and before the priority deadline comes for the Access Missouri grant, which is February 1st. So this is something that we can be mindful of as we are talking with students and families about the FAFSA application and preparing them to get it submitted in a timely manner. All right, so we are getting ready to go through slide by slide of the application so that our understanding of the application can be sharp. And as we go through again, I'm going to try to highlight some challenges and areas that may be potential barriers for students. So when students first get started, they're going to go in and sign in with their FSA ID. If students need to create an FSA ID, the things that they'll need is their Social Security number, their full name that matches what's on record with the Social Security Administration, date of birth, phone number, email address. And when we're talking to students about FAFSA or FSA ID creation, we can continue to encourage them to use their personal email address as opposed to their high school email address, since that may no longer be available to the student after they graduate. Something new with the FSA ID creation part is that it could take up to 3 to 5 days to be verified, and it is not fully functional until it's been verified. So at this time, it's not a bad idea to have FSA ID creation events, which I see a lot of people are already doing, which is great as we wait for the FAFSA to become available. Oh, too early. Now, something new with the updated FAFSA is that parent contributors without a Social Security number, they'll be able to create an FSA ID now with the updates. To do so, they will do a similar process as individuals with the Social Security number. The only difference is that they'll have a box to check indicating that they do not have a Social Security number. Now, understandably, this might make folks uncomfortable to check a box saying that you don't have a Social Security number. And something that we can do as we are supporting students and families is first and foremost validating that concern, but then also sharing that federal student aid stated that they won't share information collected on the FAFSA with other governmental entities, and the data entered on the FAFSA will only be used for financial aid purposes. I also want to point out that individuals without a Social Security number will not be able to create their FSA ID until the new FAFSA launches. So we can be mindful of that as we host those FSAID creation events, our parent contributors without Social Security number won't be able to do so until the new FAFSA is here. Also, for folks without a Social Security number, there'll be a different verification process since they will be unable to use the Social Security Administration to verify their identity. As they're creating their FSAID and they check that box, they will receive a set of knowledge-based verification questions, like what your previous address was, phone number, your current or previous employer. If those questions are not successfully answered, then there'll be another verification process that they can do. So that includes one, calling the Federal Student Aid Information Center, or also known as FISAC, to verify their identity. And then once they contact FISAC, they will get an email with instructions for providing the proper documentation to verify their identity. And until their identity has been verified, their FSAID will not be usable until that time. So there may be some additional support that we may need to offer to our parent contributors who have to follow these steps so that they can utilize their FSAID. All right, so if students already have their FSAID or a contributor has it, then they can go ahead and get logged into the FAFSA and start off their process. Things are going to look pretty similar as they did before, but one change, which we probably heard a lot, is that the student section will only get them to the student section, and the parent section will only be able to see the parent section. It's no longer going to be one seamless application as it was in the past. Now, these next few slides, they will reflect what a student is going to see in their section of the FAFSA application, and that's starting off with some onboarding information. And our first-time FAFSA filers are going to see an overview video about the FAFSA application. And there's also going to be some information about contributors and how to invite them to contribute to the FAFSA. In the following section, it'll include information on what to expect while working on the FAFSA and also after it's been submitted. Here in the student identity information section, the details here at the top is information that's transferred over from when the individual created their FSAID. And any of these details, if they need to be updated, they will need to click on that link that says account settings where they can make changes, because the user will not be able to make changes in the FAFSA application itself. So this next screen here, we may have had a chance to put eyes on this already, but this is the FAFSA FTI approval section where they will be asked to provide consent to retrieve their information from the IRS, and it be shared with institutions and state entities to be considered for aid eligibility. So providing this consent is going to be required now for students and any required contributors in order for the student to be eligible for federal aid. So we'll want to be doing our best to make sure that students and families fully understand this, especially for those that have done the FAFSA in the past, where the IRS data retrieval tool was an optional thing. It will no longer be optional now. So before the student enters the personal circumstances section, they're going to see some language explaining that their responses will affect how much aid they're eligible to receive, and that they may need to collect information from another person based on those answers. So a lot of this is what we've seen in the previous FAFSAs. I want to point out that if we're working with students that were enrolled in dual enrollment during their high school years, they should still select first-time college student so that they can still be considered for the appropriate amount of financial aid. And then also this last question here about teaching certificate. This is something that we'll only see if the student selects that they've had their first bachelor's degree in the previous question. But I wanted to make sure that we all had a chance to put our eyes on that question, because it's possible that many students that we work with will not be selected in that option. All right, so the question here, again, they're similar to the ones that we saw in the previous FAFSA application, where if a student cannot answer yes to any of the personal circumstances question, that would be considered dependent, and their FAFSA will require the information of their parents unless they have other qualifying circumstances. If a student selects yes to the question about unaccompanied or either homeless or self-supporting or at risk of being homeless, then there's going to be an additional section to identify if any of the options below determine the student as homeless or at risk of being homeless. For any student that we are working with that can check any of these boxes, what we can be doing is giving them a heads up that they may need to provide supporting documentation to their school's financial aid office. And we can also extend some support in helping them complete that process if that's something that they need to do. Now, if the student doesn't select any of the questions to be deemed independent, then they're going to see this question related to unusual circumstances. I do want to pause here in this section and say that at the Scholarship Foundation, we do try really hard to be mindful about language, and we consider the word unusual to be problematic in these instances. So whenever I am talking about students that are provisionally independent in their circumstances, I'm going to use other language when possible. Depending on how the student responds here, if they respond yes, then they will be considered provisionally independent, and this is a new feature of the FAFSA application. Also, I'm going to go back in the previous slide. If the student happens to select yes, and none of these apply, then that student will also be considered provisionally independent. All right, so here you'll see that a provisionally independent student would allow them to file the FAFSA without inviting a parent contributor, but they would need to follow up with their college's financial aid office and provide documentation to verify those circumstances. As we're working with students that fit into the category of being provisionally independent, they may need some support in locating documentation that's required, and then also that follow-through process. So though their FAFSA application can be submitted, it won't be processed until the schools receive the appropriate documentation. If we happen to be working with students in the school setting and are concerned about the follow-through, the location of documentations, especially as we get closer to the end of the school year, and the student may not have access to the same support as they did during the school year, you are welcome to reach out to one of the student advisors at the Scholarship Foundation, and we can help with that process and support that student in getting everything that they need to have their FAFSA process before the start of the school year. All right, I'm going to pause for a moment. So if a student's not considered independent or provisionally independent, then this is the next slide that they'll see. It'll tell them their dependency status based on their response to the previous questions. And then it'll also let them know what'll happen if they do not provide parent information. And so this is something that we saw as well in the previous FAFSA, that they'll only be eligible for the unsubsidized loan if they are required to provide parent information and they don't. The final part of the personal circumstances section is going to walk the student through who should they invite as their parent contributor or contributor. I believe the FAFSA is calling this the parent wizard. It should be a more intuitive way to help the student identify who their contributor is. So if the student is required to provide a contributor, they'll answer these questions, and then based on their responses, they're going to see another set of questions until they see the blue prompt at the bottom. With the FAFSA updates, the parent on the FAFSA is no longer going to be the custodial parent. It's the parent that provides more than half of the financial support to the student. So we'll see here that there's language that if both parents provide an equal amount of financial support, or if they don't support the student financially, select no and refer to the parent with the greatest income or asset in the next question. So this is some helpful language to help students distinguish which parent they may need to provide support or provide on their FAFSA. And then the next question will ask if the parent that they selected has remarried, and based on their response, they're going to see that blue prompt telling the students whose information will be needed on their FAFSA. So once the student determines their parent contributor, they're going to be asked to invite them using the information that we see on the screen. It's going to be important that parents, one, have access to this information and accurately input it in this section so that their parents can get this invite. All right. So next, after the personal circumstances section, the student will enter the demographic section. Some of the questions asked here will help determine the student's financial eligibility, but that does not include the questions that are related to gender that we see here. And also same goes for the questions that are related to race. And then students will ask to select their citizenship status. For our students that are selecting eligible non-citizen, once they select that option, then they'll see a field to enter in their A number. Then the student will be asked to answer questions about their parents' educational status, if they had a parent that was killed in the line of duty, and a definition for that. And then, as we saw before, they'll be asked to search for their high school. And then following that, they'll be entering the finances section. At this point, students would have already provided the FAFSA FTI approval, so the financial questions will include the ones that we see here on the screen. Let me click, there we go. So these. And then following that would be the asset questions. I want to pause here. So not everyone will see the asset questions. How it'll work is if the parent starts the FAFSA first and their responses will make them exempt from the asset questions, then the student will not see the asset questions in their sections. However, if the student starts their FAFSA first and it's later determined that the student is exempt from the asset question based on their parents' responses, then the asset questions that the student provided won't be utilized on their FAFSA. So the final section for the student is where they'll select the colleges that they want to receive their FAFSA information. This is pretty similar to what we saw before in the college selection section. Once the student searches for their school, they'll select it. But the one difference about this section is that students will be able to add up to 20 schools at once as opposed to 10. And we'll also see some language like we see here highlighted in green, where it says whichever state that the student listed as their primary residence. They may see some language that if their state requires for the first 1 or 2 spots to include in-state colleges in order for them to be considered for state aid. And I want to mention that that is not the case for the state of Missouri, but for folks that have states where that is required, we can make sure that students understand that requirement in addition to the language that's provided. All right, so as the student reaches the end of their section, they're going to have an opportunity to review all of their responses. The tabs here we can expand so the students can see the responses for each individual section. And then the student will also have a chance to review who they've invited as their contributor. And you can see here, they can check the status of that invitation as well. And then like before, the student will be prompted to review and sign their FAFSA application. Now, as we are working with students, as they complete their section, we want to make sure that they understand that their FAFSA is not done until all required contributors have done their section as well. All right, so now these next few slides will be what a parent contributor will see in their section. This is a sample of the invite email that the parent will receive when they've been invited by a student contributor. So similar to the student, the parent contributor will log in with their FSA ID. And if they don't have one, they'll need to create one and give it time to be verified before it's fully functional. Then they'll accept the invitation. We want to make sure that students are not declining. I do believe if they happen to decline, there is a way to go back and accept the invitation. But there's language helping the student understand or helping the parent contributor understand what the invite is for. All right, so upon entering the student's application as a parent contributor, they will see something similar to what we see on the screen now. There'll be some language saying that this is required for the student to be considered for financial aid, and then we'll see that FAQ section there at the bottom. Now, in the interest of time, I will not spend a whole lot of time on the slides that we talked about in the student section that we will also see in the parent section, but I do want to make sure that we have a chance to at least put eyes on it. All right, so early on in the parent section, we'll see that FAFSA FTI approval, where it will have the same language as the student, indicating that it is required and that the information will be retrieved from the IRS and also shared with any schools listed on the student's FAFSA and any necessary state entities to be considered for state aid as well. All right, so now we're going to enter the parent demographic section. We will have the marital status, and if it's determined that another parent needs to be invited as a contributor, then the parent may see a prompt to invite their spouse or partner to the student's FAFSA as well. Like the student, they will list their state of legal residence, and then they'll move on to the parent finances. When we are talking to students and families and preparing them to do the FAFSA application, something that we can include on material that'll be helpful to have on hand is their tax information. And even so, it's still important to have on hand, even though they will have to provide that FTI approval. All right, so here parents will have the opportunity to select if they are receiving any of the federal benefits during the specified years. Something that FAFSA will be asking now is if the student received free or reduced lunch. This is something that may be worth pointing out as we're supporting folks with their FAFSA, because if any of the options here on this page are selected, that'll result in that automatic asset exemption. So meaning that they won't be required to report on the asset questions that others may be asked to report. When we get to the family size questions, it's going to ask if the family size is different from what was claimed on the tax return. This may be a good reason why having those tax documentations on hand will be important. And then we'll also see a question about the number in college. However, this will not impact that SAI calculation like it impacted the former EFC, expected family contribution. So this is something that we can start having early conversations with families about, especially if they have had multiple college students in college at the same time and will continue to have multiple college students in college at the same time, because this potential change might impact their aid eligibility with these updates. Here again is a good reason why tax documentation may be helpful as they're working on the document, just in case they need to refer to it to respond to any of these questions. And then also on this page, I want to point out that now child support received and the net worth of small businesses and farms will also be included in the asset section for those not exempt and used in the SAI calculation. All right, so like the student section, the parent will have a chance to review everything that they've done before they sign and submit. signature page and submission page here. Okay, so if a second parent is needed as a contributor, then they'll follow the similar steps as the first parent. They'll enter their information, review, sign, and submit. However, if all of the required contributors have completed their section, then they'll see this confirmation page. And once the FAFSA has been processed, the student will have access to their FAFSA submission summary, where they can see when their application was received, when it's been processed, in the submission summary, which will represent if they happen to make corrections to their application. They will also see the estimated federal student aid listed for the student, as well as their calculated SAI. We'll see here in this example that the student here has a SAI of negative 355. And now that SAI can go as low as negative 1,500. And then the student will also see their responses in their FAFSA submission summary, as well as the schools listed and that college scorecard stats that we've seen in the past. And then the next steps and things to be aware of. Now, as we get close to the end, I did want to take some time to kind of have some of the things that we should consider in one place. So first is that the two-factor authentication will be required for students and families in order to access their FAFSA. So as we are hosting FAFSA completion events, we want to be mindful that if we have firewalls that may prevent them from either accessing their email or unreliable cell service, where they would need access to their cell phones to receive that two-factor authentication, we may want to be mindful as we're deciding where we're going to host that event at. Also, whenever an individual creates their FSA ID, they'll receive that backup code. This backup code is a one-time use code. So once the individual uses their backup code, they'll receive a new one, and they'll need to save that with all of their FSA ID information. This is something I mentioned, but worth mentioning again. The parent and student section will be completely separate. Now, this may pose some challenges for FAFSA completion for students, especially for any parents that may be unsupportive or disengaged in the FAFSA completion process. So this is something that we want to be mindful of, especially since there has not been a change in that Missouri priority deadline being February 1st. We can also use this deadline to try to encourage families to get their FAFSA submitted in a timely manner. So if the student's application is inactive for 45 days, the application can be deleted, meaning the student will have to start over and re-enter all the information they did. This is also something we can utilize to encourage parents. If a student's done their section and we're still waiting on the student section, we can let them know that it is possible that the information can be deleted. But also this language is included on the application, but something worth mentioning verbally as well. Something else that I mentioned during those slides is that the number of family members in college will no longer impact the SAI. And also that businesses and farms are now reportable assets regardless of the size, along with child support received. So for those that will not be exempt from these questions, we want to start chatting with those families now to let them know that they may experience a considerable change in their SAI. All right. So one of the final things that I want to share with you all is some helpful resources. One of them includes the new prototype of the FAFSA application. If you all have not had a chance to click through this, it's highly encouraged. It's a great way to get to see those slides and play around with the different scenarios. Also, with the helpful parent wizard embedded in the FAFSA application, that's going to be very helpful to help students understand who is going to be the parent contributor on the FAFSA. However, there is an updated infographic available as well that we can be sharing with students and families in advance. Also, through the Scholarship Foundation on our website, you can find a lot of helpful financial aid tools and more. And then we also have our workshop schedules that is designed for students and families that we'll be hosting throughout the year. And then also our final FAFSA Friday will be on December 8th. I hope you all can join us because this one will be an FAQ session where we will be asking all of our questions and have an opportunity to learn and increase our knowledge and address any concerns together. Lastly, this is our amazing advising team. I do want to do a plug and say, if you all are hosting any events where you would like some extra hands for FAFSA completion or FSAID creation, we would love to be a part of that and support you in supporting your students. We are also available to do workshops at your schools for the students and families as well. So keep that in mind. And now we can open things up for questions. I did see there was some action in the chat as well.
It was mostly me, though, Manisha.
Oh,
Dropping
it's mostly you. Okay, cool.
There was one question about power of attorney, but we addressed that power of attorney and legal guardianship are typically separate things.
Okay, great. Thank you for addressing that. Well, if there are no other questions, then I do want to thank you all for being here this morning and spending time with us as we prepare for the FAFSA to open up. If you all do have questions that come at a later point, definitely you can reach out to the Scholarship Foundation. Our contact information can be found on the screen. And I hope you all have a lovely Friday.
Thank you, Dominisha. Great job.
Thanks, Dominisha.
Cool.